Good morning to everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. I've learned through bitter experience that what you really want to do if you want to get something done is address people who have a day that's bursting at the seams. And pretty much by definition, this professional group consists of such people, not the least of them, Mr. Berkeley, whose presence and erudition here was a pleasure to witness and to imbibe, and I want to thank you most sincerely for taking the time and the trouble and the effort to say things that are full of meaning, I say the same to the members of the audience. I assume that none of you have anything to do here this morning and therefore you popped in for the free food, but it's not to be taken for granted, and thank you very much. I've been the victim of numerous presentations of this kind, solicitations by people who think that I've got nothing better to do than to listen to them. So allow me to disabuse you of the idea that I or my two colleagues here, Debbie Fishman sitting here, who's the Executive Director of Keren Malki in Jerusalem, and Nicole Gordon, who's sitting back there, who does the same here in the UK, we don't take for granted that you're on side, that you know why we're here, other than for the privilege of being able to provide some food, or that we know what we're talking about. I'm going to just say a few things about what it is that brings us here to the UK. For the first time in the 12 or so years of the existence of Keren Malki, we've made a systematic effort to go out and reach people and try to tell them about the work that we do, because we think it's important. We think that it does good, and we think that people who participate in this work will derive a colossal return on investment, and I'll try to justify that in the next couple of minutes. I'm in this as the honorary chairman. I work for a living. I don't work inside Keren Malki. We have a terrific staff, and that's been the model from day one. And I do it for a reason that it would take me quite some time to elaborate in order to really get this off my chest. I don't have that time. So allow me to blunder right into it. Keren Malki exists as a memorial to my child. If it did nothing else, that would be the justification. It would be enough for me to pick up, leave my wife and children and grandchildren at home in Jerusalem and go off and talk to people about Keren Malki, because, like many people at certain junctures in life, I've had to ask myself, what the hell do you do now? Your daughter's been murdered. Your life's been turned upside down, both as an individual and as a family. You're in a rotten place in terms of where you're moving in life. What do you do now? It's not an academic or rhetorical question, as you can imagine. It's the kind of question that no one should have to ask, but we find ourselves asking it at various junctures in life. I'm reminded of the fact that my own parents asked themselves this question, in common with most Australian Jews of my generation, born 3 years before Mr. Berkeley. I'm the child of Holocaust survivors, almost the entire community. I think Melbourne has the highest proportion of Holocaust survivors as constituents of the community in the world. My parents, who survived the war, undoubtedly asked themselves, what do you do now? Where do you go? How do you take care of life? What should your priorities be? What should you ignore and what should you focus on? And thank God, in common with almost everybody I know in the cohort of young Australian Jews with whom I was raised, their decision was focus on life, focus on the kids, and get on with building something of value. Contribute to the community, and contribute most of all to the people who you love. I don't think I ever heard words to that effect from my parents, but I'm quite sure that that's the message that they articulated in their own way to themselves and eventually to their children. And for this reason, Melbourne happens to have characteristics very similar, on the basis of the limited familiarity I have here with this community of Manchester, with Manchester. It's a similar kind of town. But in the way that my parents, who lost their parents and who lost most of their siblings and certainly lost their education and their youth, had to decide for themselves, I've also had to decide together with my wife and my children, what do you do? And we, of course, did what most people in our situation do in the face of an act of murder. We formed ourselves into a militia, got ourselves some weapons, and found some Palestinian Arab schools and pizza restaurants and went in there and carried out massacres. Well, of course, you know that I'm using very black humor when I say these things, because the reality of Israeli life today in the face of some, approximately, by my calculation, 5,000 families that have been affected since the start of the Arafat War, which some people call the Second Intifada, that began at Rosh Hashanah of the year 2000 and continues up to and including this morning. We've actually had to deal with this in a very practical way. We've had to answer questions about how do we educate our children, what do we say to our grandchildren, how do we relate to our neighbours, what sort of voting should we be engaged in, how much should we speak out to people outside of Israel, how much should we speak out to our own neighbours. Trust me when I say that these are real issues. These are not rhetorical flourishes, and they're not optional matters to address. And in the same way, I must say that the partners of this fine firm, and I acknowledge Mr. Jason, because he's the, Mr. Jacob? Mr. Wolf, I'm sorry, for their very fine gesture in making this possible, and I have to say it's marvellous what you've done. Thank you so much. We decided that there were things which we could do which had an element of, and excuse the expression, chesed. There are some people in the room who may never have heard the word, but it's a fundamental value in Jewish life. Chesed saves people. Chesed is kindness. It sounds lame. It sounds girlyish. It sounds like pansy talk. It's not. If you make the decision not to walk into a restaurant with a gun in your hand in order to kill people who you think are the first cousins of the people who killed your own child, and instead go off and, I don't know, establish a bookshelf in the local library, you're not doing something that's cowardly. You're actually doing something that reflects a vote for life, a vote for going on, a vote for asserting why we are right, and those people who did send the person with the guitar case filled with explosives on his back are not only wrong, but they're bestial. They're barbaric, they're savage. They deserve not one skerrick of support from civilized people in places like Manchester and the United Kingdom and Tanganyika and any place that you can think of. They don't deserve that support. The terrorism in which they engage is not some kind of incidental accessory to their outlook on life. It's fundamental to it. And I can only reinforce that point by the following illustration that I'm sure most of you won't know, but that I think speaks enormously articulately, and then I'll come to my real point. The woman who carried the human bomb, I refuse to use the expression suicide bomber, and I hope that I'll persuade you just by saying so that you should never use those words. Suicide bombers are never about suicide. They're always about killing other people. The suicide, the death of the person who carries the bomb is always incidental. The young woman who engineered the massacre at the Sbarro restaurant and who brought the human bomb with her and then fled according to the plan to get back to where she came from was an interesting personality. She's of course a free person today. As you may know, she was freed in the Gilad Shalit transaction of October 2011, one of the 1,027 terrorists, almost all of whom were, in the very literal sense, murderers. She has a rich life, she's married, she's a TV personality, she has her own program that goes out each week on the satellite TV network throughout the Arabic-speaking world, and the fact that perhaps nobody in this room speaks Arabic should not disguise the reality that she's a person of colossal significance. And with all due respect to Mr. Berkeley, she may be better known than he is. But for what? When she left Jerusalem that day on the afternoon of the 9th of August 2001, she went back to her workplace. She was the newsreader on official Palestinian television that night, so that any Palestinian Arab switching on their TV at 7 o'clock that evening would have seen a very attractive, very calm-looking, well-made-up lady of 21 saying, "Today in occupied Jerusalem," when what she really meant to say was, "Today in occupied Jerusalem, I carried out a massacre." And I'm so proud of it that I can barely contain myself from singing at this moment. This I know because she has said that subsequently. She could barely contain the joy of knowing that she'd carried out acts of murder. So, the question that I posed a moment ago was the question that's been haunting me, and I can tell you, my wife, for the last 12 and a half years. What do you do now? Well, in a certain way, we've answered it. In a certain way. It's only part of the answer, and if we had 2 hours to talk, I'd try to flesh out the rest of the answer. or rather the questions, because I have many more questions than answers. But the work of Keren Malki, and you see some snapshots of families who agreed to have the photographs taken in their homes. The work of Keren Malki is the memorial to my daughter, but much more than that. First and foremost, that's what it is. I said that. I wouldn't do this if I were not able to get in front of people and say there was a child called Malki Roth who at the age of 15 had done more than most of us ever get to do in a lifetime, more good. And then she was stolen from us. But it also does, objectively speaking, some wonderful work. The work of Keren Malki was always predicated on a very simple business model. Empower the families like me. We have a very disabled youngest child as a result of a medical accident when our youngest child was a year old and when Malki was 9, which left her brain damaged and blind and incapable of communicating with the world and in need of 24-hour-a-day care, 7 days a week. There are many families like us, about 65,000 in Israel, not all of them Jews, who have asked and generally been refused the right to keep that child at home and to receive benefits from the government, from the health funds, from the various ministries that have responsibility for the educating of children, whether they're able-bodied or disabled, and have been refused. We were refused, but we're angry people. We were already angry before our daughter Malki was murdered. My wife, as I mentioned, did I mention that she's a lawyer also? I'm a lawyer by training. I no longer work in the field, or a covered lawyer as they call it in America. Decided that we had to fight the system, and we kept fighting up until the moment that our oldest daughter Malki was murdered. And then we stopped fighting. Fighting was beyond our capability. We had other issues on our minds that simply neutralized us and continue to do so today, 12 and a half years later. But what we did up until that point, which was to fight the system, a system which said to us, you ought not to be taking care of this very disabled child. We over here, in the ministry, in the kibbutz, in the tax department, wherever we may be, we know how to do this better than you. So, Daddy, remember, we love your child at least as much as you do. You're never the same person when you hear foolishness of that kind spoken right into your face by a government official. And what we do today in the work of Keren Malki is to level the playing field. We say to the families who've made the decision that they would want to give love and closeness to their child with special needs in the home, rather than hand the child off to institutional care. We say to those people, you go out there and you find the equipment that you need to keep your child at home, special chair, walker, stander, bath insert. Come to us, we'll provide it. We have a partnership with the wonderful Yad Sarah organization, which I hope is known to some of you at least, the largest lending organization in the world. And we brought them into a place that they were not, which is the providing of equipment for chronically disabled children. This was 12 years ago. Today we have a flourishing joint venture with them, literally structured as a joint venture. But that's the smaller part of what we do. The larger part by far is we say to the families, we know that your child is going to benefit from non-medical therapies in the nature of physical therapy, or physio as it's called here, I think, occupational therapy, speech therapy, therapeutic horse riding, and therapeutic swimming or hydrotherapy. We know that you want this therapy, these therapies, and we know that the system gives you a very hard time. In fact, most of the time, the answer from your health fund is no. So you go and get that no, come to us with the no, and then we'll fund those therapies. And I can say with great pleasure, with great pride, with a great sense of revenge and some amelioration of my anger, which is much stronger than perhaps you can tell from looking at me, that we've funded almost 40,000 such therapy sessions in the last several years, and we're on a curve that means we're providing more and more of those therapies, and in so doing, and here you have to trust me, changing people's lives. The work of Keren Malki has always been funded by ordinary people. I met yesterday with Colin Parry. Some of you will know him as the father of a child who was blown to pieces by the cursed IRA. His organisation is in a bad way today because all of their funding comes from the lottery organisation here. I've forgotten the name. Most of it. And they've been cut off. Times are tough in the UK. He's laying off people. Our organisation, I hope, will never have to face that situation because we have a totally diffuse support base. Most of our funding comes from people in the world's superpowers. Australia, Why are you smiling? Israel and the United States. This is the first attempt to really try to generate some support here in the UK, and I hope that at the end of this next few days we won't be disappointed. But being able to organise a structure that is funded in that way is really a strategy for survival. So we have lots of people who give modest amounts of money. We have a handful of trusts and foundations who give us serious amounts of money, but the result of all of this is we're growing, we're doing exceptionally good work, and I don't have the embarrassment, which I hope other people do, of looking you in the faces and saying, give me money, because I don't take any of it. And I maintain, as somebody who gives to charity, that when the person in front of me is asking for the money and is going to take some part of that for himself, that I want to understand that really, really well before I hand over my money, because I work hard for my money. So I don't have that problem. I stand up in front of you and I say, we do good work. I'm not part of the cost structure. I'm part of the bringing in structure. And that's the only way that I would have things, because, as I've said now 3 times in this brief few words, just before I sit down, I'll say it again, this is first and foremost a memorial to a wonderful life. I urge you to please go and look at the website that is referred to over and again in the papers in your laps, because, among other things, there is a song on the website which my daughter Malki wrote without ever telling her mother and father. She wrote it because there was a competition in her school, the Chorev school in Jerusalem. Compose either the music or the words and submit it for a prize. She wrote the music and the words and never finished it, because at the age of 15, perhaps you'll remember what life was like when we were 15, you've got all the time in the world. So she missed the cutoff and then she was no longer alive. But she wrote a marvellous song, and it's now been recorded several times by professional musicians, I think 4 or 5 different versions, and it's on that website. If you have children who ever listen to music, I urge you to point them to it. It's written in Hebrew. Hebrew was the spoken language of my daughter outside the home. In our home we only speak English, but outside the home the children are completely Israeli. Everyone has gone through the army. Everyone's part of Israeli life. Malki wrote this song in Hebrew. It's called Shir Lismoach, a song to be happy about, and it really expresses the kind of Jewish power that enables people like my parents to come out of the Holocaust, people like those who founded Manchester after coming from unspeakably difficult times in Eastern Europe, and the spirit of the State of Israel. People in Israel understand that no one's going to give us an easy time, and we can't focus only on destroying the enemy, we've got to focus on building up ourselves. So please help us with the work of Keren Malki. There are forms there, there are websites there, there's every possible way that technology makes it possible for you to transfer some money from your account to our account. Oh, and we have an annual concert on the 6th of April. It's one of the highlights of the entertainment year in Israel. And here, I'm not kidding, it's at the Jerusalem Theatre. And if you're in Israel on the 6th of April, please buy a ticket and come along. It'll be a fabulous show, as it has been for the last several years. Thank you again very much for your attention. Thank you again. Before Achsani, I want to say thank you very much to the hosts. Mr. Berkeley, thank you so much for your time. And thank you, all of you, for being here today. And I very much appreciate whatever support you're willing to give us. Thank you. A big issue. Thank you so much. It's really marvellous.